Tov, Shabbat Shalom, Moedim L'Simcha, a good Moed, a good festival to all. So, all of you guys who are regulars, we have a couple of visitors, of course, who don't come as are visiting this Shabbat. But for all the regulars, know that our typical practice is to do a little Torah discussion and study. But once in a while, me or Jenny take a little rabbinic privilege to discuss a matter of concern, like an inyan dayom, as it says in the Talmud, like an issue of the day. What's something on in the times, and that could be many different issues. But the issue I want to focus on this Shabbat Hol Hamoed Pesah is the issue of Israel and its fight for maintaining its democratic character. So I want to say really kind of like a 3-point, old school sermon. I have some ideas, I have some stories, I have some personal reflections. Obviously, I have some Torah thoughts as well. And, knowing our congregation, seeing who's here today, imagining who's here on the live stream, 2 Jews when it comes to Israel, there's 55,000 different opinions. So I just want to put out ahead of time that if you came here expecting to say amen to everything I said, you came to the wrong shul this Shabbat, okay? You're going to hear things you don't like, probably. Some of you like to hear things you like enormously. I invite everyone to take a nice deep Pesach breath, okay? This is an opportunity because the issue of Israel is so important to me and to this congregation and to the Jewish world that to ignore the subject from this bima in our congregation would be a shanda, would be an embarrassment. We must address this. It cannot be some kind of elephant in the shul, so to speak. We have to discuss it, and it comes from a place of love and concern. This is because we love and care about the state of Israel and its democratic character in particular, that I feel called to talk about it. So yes, there are things you're going to hear in this that you may not like. You may think a particular word or two in terms of word choice may not be perfect or the way that you hits your ears perfectly. It's okay. This is not the time during shul time to discuss it with me and share your feedback, but it will be here afterwards and over a piece of matzah, or gefilte fish. I'm happy to hear your thoughts. Or after Shabbat is over, please, I invite you to write me, as many of you do, and let me know what you think. I invite you to do so, but at the proper time. This is quote-unquote Rabbi Drasha time. Okay, so more preamble. First, as some of you have been writing literally right up until Shabbat and on Shabbat, there have been literal, sadly, terror attacks in Israel and Tel Aviv, in the West Bank, going on right now. There was rocket fire from Lebanon and even from Gaza in the past few days. Without going into the back and forth of the source of that, the bottom line is that we pray deeply for the security of all people in the region, and anyone attacked, God forbid, hurt or killed in the course of terrorism, it is uniformly, categorically wrong. We believe that this issue, no matter how much suffering is involved, will not be solved by violence. Violence is not only not constructive, it is immoral. And we stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Israel who are suffering, some who actually went into bomb shelters back to those rooms over the past few days, and unquestionably, that we hold our hearts with them directly. I have cousins in my own family that live in the Galilee where some of those rockets were going over. So this is not just some kind of general concern, it is a personal concern for all of us, and we hold them in our prayers. The second thing I want to say is that as much as I fancy myself, and I took it in college, okay, I'm not a political scientist. So I'm not, if I offer one comment here or there about political science, you say, well, Eric didn't get it exactly right. He made it. Okay, I invite you to have rachmanis and compassion on me. Dan lakaf zechut, have a little bit of benefit of the doubt. I think I basically have the idea of what's going on over there, but if you have a better sense of what's going on, okay, I'm happy to have you educate me later. But there is a basic issue around the judiciary and democracy that I'll give some background about, and I invite you in the course of this to see that in that fashion. But I am going to give what I believe are some Torah thoughts and Jewish legal thoughts and Jewish moral thought on what's happening, and that's going to be my focus. That I do consider to be my wheelhouse. Okay, so let's talk about the background. So just before Pesach, little did I know my sermon would come during Pesach, but what can I do? Prime Minister Netanyahu put a kind of temporary pause to this judicial reform, which seems to have at least lowered the temperature of the tension in Israel, but it obviously not solved the problem. This has just postponed the problem potentially. But what is the basic issue that's going on, really, if we could say, as Hillel would say, on one leg? What is the one issue going on? So at its source, the problem that Israel faces, if you look at it writ large, is Israel does not have a constitution like the United States has. Not that we're a perfect country with our constitution, but at least we have a constitution. Israel has a group, I believe there are 4 of them, what's called basic laws. These were passed in the early 50s to establish basic concepts, including some of them read by Rick so beautifully in that prayer, based on the Declaration of Independence, that speak of general issues of equality and how citizens should be treated, et cetera, et cetera. Those basic laws have served and kind of, in our American model, like a constitution, in the sense that anytime a law is passed by the Knesset, which is Israel's parliament, like our Congress, the Supreme Court, when determining whether these are legal or illegal, looks back at those basic laws and makes a determination of whether these are legal or illegal issues or should be followed or not followed based on those basic laws. However, those basic laws are not constitutional in that sense, and what that means is there's not a very clear process on how to change the basic laws, how to add to the basic laws, like we do in America. We have referendums, we have 2/3, we have a veto power, all that kind of things that go on. These things do not go on in Israel because it's not been clarified yet. So writ large, the problem Israel faces is a lack of a constitution. So come back. So what happened over the years? And this I'm going to give here really on one leg. On one leg, if you think about it kind of writ large, big gadol, the Knesset passes laws. That is the voice of the people. But if a law seems to go against the basic law, then the Supreme Court can overrule it. And consistently over the years, primarily the most, I guess it's considered universally acknowledged or by political scientists, the most activist court in recent years was led by a man named Aaron Barak. He would often be the Supreme Court head, kind of the Chief Justice, kind of like our current, version, that would be leading and voicing the opinions that would nullify laws by the Knesset. And these issues, when they arose, these kind of nullification of laws, if you had to say it in general, Aaron Barak represented, and again, this is a comment, but this is where some of the tensions arise, the least perspective, he was Ashkenazi, which means light-skinned as well. He came from a kind of elite of Israeli society. Some saw that as elite education and elite history. Others looked at it as elite in a pejorative way, in a way that is against Mizrahi and Jews from the East or from Arab lands. And the tension in Israel in general, as some of you may know in Israeli political history, is Israel was founded primarily and led by this kind of Ashkenazi elite out of Eastern Europe and Western Europe, but over the years with immigration and different changes in demography and population growth, Israel is 50-50 or even 45% more Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews than Ashkenazi Jews. So if you think about it writ large, the Knesset, which was representing a more orthodox, more religiously traditional, some would say intolerant practice, on that side, more from Jews of Eastern land and from the Mizrahi lands, was facing up and passing laws that were regularly being discounted, nullified, or contradicted by the Supreme Court. And you can see the kind of tension in society when the Knesset, when the voice of the people, what they believe should happen, is being struck down by the Supreme Court. It played into a sectarism, disagreements in Israeli society, and really, who decides? Do the people decide the laws? Or does the Supreme Court universally, what's the role of this? What's the checks and balances? How does this play out? Well, that large question, studies have shown in Israeli society that 70 to 80% of Israelis, whether you're Ashkenazi, whether you're affluent, whether you're Mizrahi, you're Orthodox, Haredi, the vast majority of Israelis, studies show, this is actually represented by the president of Israel, which is a symbolic ceremony, or say, we recognize there's some imbalance. The fact that the Supreme Court can just overrule so many and there's no process for recourse, that it seems to create this kind of tension between. and we don't have a way of really utilizing this governmentally, we have a problem, and we are in need of a constitution and a process to re-understand and kind of remake that problem. That is, in a sense, the good story, that we all see that most see that there's a problem with Israeli society and specifically judiciary. That's agreed upon. The challenge is the current government of Israel, led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, which won an election based on 64 seats or mandates out of 120, which means basically 57%, basically it's no landslide win, just a little bit of a majority, but filled with widely recognized right-wing Orthodox or Orthodox-leaning parties that represent a kind of hawkish, entire land of Israel approach, which do not seek, some of them directly and some of them quietly, any type of peace reconciliation with Palestinians. This group basically said, we've had enough. We don't want to reform the judiciary or try to create a constitution we want to universally abolish the judiciary. We want to essentially abolish the power of the Supreme Court. We want to say any law we pass by the Knesset, as long as it's by a certain number of majority, it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says. To give a provocative equivalent, it might be like if the United States of America said, only white people can vote, and that law was passed by the Congress, and then it went to the Supreme Court, as the Supreme Court says, wait a second, it says here all people are created equal with inalienable rights. You can't decide that. And the Knesset says, but we are the majority. We represent the people. You, Supreme Court, and this is the law. Now, the reason that law is wrong, first, because it's against morally wrong, okay? But it's wrong because it goes against, as interpreted, our Constitution. And that's the balance of powers we have in America. But in Israel, the push was to say, let us make sure, or let's diminish or eliminate the ability of any law passed by the Knesset to ever be overruled by the Supreme Court, which would mean that essentially the Knesset, wherever it went, could pass all kinds of things that would be deeply, profoundly immoral, unethical, as I would say, un-Jewish, against the Torah, and lead Israel in a completely illiberal place where basically the power of the Knesset and ultimately the prime minister or the head of Knesset would be so powerful with no significant checks and balances, it would lead to the equivalency of an autocracy or something like a dictatorship. That is why nearly 8% of the Israeli population were out in the streets blocking the equivalent of Route 95, if you can imagine, called the Ayalon, blocking traffic out. I'm sure this Saturday night there's going to be even more continued protests. And not just people that are like the typical protesters who don't like Prime Minister Netanyahu, okay? Like across the spectrum, people who identify as Orthodox, people who identify as traditional, people who are even hawkish. There was a call out by three people, some of them, you may know these names, some may not, Mati Friedman, Yossi Klein Halevi, and Rabbi Daniel Gordis. Each of them consider themselves in the center of Israeli political opinion, or even to the right on Israeli political opinion, very critical of American Jews like me, who are critical of Israel at times. They wrote an open letter to the entire American Jewish community, but especially to American rabbis, saying you must protest publicly in your lands, in America and wherever you're in the diaspora, to make sure your voice is heard, that these judicial reforms do not come. When these very centrist, very protective, usually seen as the defenders of Israel in public opinion, come forward and they are begging us, basically they're begging me to give a sermon like this on a Shabbat, you know this is not the usual right-left divide that goes on battling over the Palestinian peace process. This is a much more widely. And in fact, which really blew me away, now we're getting inside the Jewish baseball weeds, there is a #1 free newspaper in Israel, the most popular newspaper, called Yisrael Hayom, Israel Today, which was founded by a gentleman named Sheldon Adelson. may he rest in peace, who I could not agree with anything about him on any. He was perhaps the greatest supporter financially of President Trump. Just as an example, he was a casino mogul and billionaire out of Las Vegas. His wife, Miriam, who inherited all of his businesses and who, of course, stood with him. Miriam Edelson, some of you know, President Trump actually gave a Congressional Medal of Honor to her. Extraordinarily hawkish and right-wing on the issues of Palestinians and Middle Eastern politics. She wrote in her free paper, Yisrael Hayom, in Hebrew, which, by the way, is credited with having been essentially, people will say, the voice for Prime Minister Netanyahu, constantly promoting him in Israeli society and giving him a kind of like propaganda machine, some would say. She wrote an op-ed in her paper saying, I'm against these judicial reforms. Why are we doing this so fast? Why don't we have a conversation? We have to question. And she even put, which some people would like to say, that one of the reasons why Prime Minister Netanyahu is interested in this may not be simply because of his belief about the system or politics, but sadly, some of you know he personally is under judicial investigation of at least 4 criminal cases against himself. So she questioned all of that in her op-ed. When Miriam Edelson goes far, I would be kind of like, I think, like Rupert Murdoch writing a kind of op-ed on Fox News against President Trump or Governor DeSantis or something like this. It's someone very much entrenched in the right-wing camp who has an incredibly loud right-wing voice, who's given their money tremendous, and she was calling against it. Okay. That is my background to say that's why I have 3 points to make about these judicial reforms. Here's the first, all right? When I was in college, all right, little story time with Rabbi Eric, okay, get comfortable, all right? And I came back from Israel, my study abroad, and I was this much familiar with Israeli-Palestinian conflict, just enough to be dangerous, okay? I go to my campus Hillel, and my Hillel was so fired up that I was there. The rabbi there happened to be a very traditional Orthodox rabbi. He grabbed me, he says, you know what, you love Israel, you just came back. I want you to be the AIPAC representative on campus. And I didn't really know what that was at that time. I wasn't even familiar with AIPAC. I'd never understanding. AIPAC was at that time, and some would argue to this day, the largest pro-Israel lobbying group in Congress. And he said, go up there, and I want you to stand in the middle of campus and protest and speak up for Israel to get government support, for the American government to give it financial support. Believe it or not, at that time, it was a debate with the Bush administration, Republican administration, over something called loan guarantees, which was money that the Israeli government, Shamir, wanted America to give as loans to help build settlements in the West Bank. This just shows you how idiotic and dumb I was at the time. I didn't even understand what that meant. I just thought, okay, AIPAC wants it, it's Israel. I mean, okay, I'll stand in campus, whatever. So as I'm going and getting involved in this, then I start reading more information. As I'm realizing, oy vey's me, I don't know if I believe in what I'm doing here, but it's, this is what you do in college, stupid things, okay? But I'm beginning to understand, so wait, there's more complexity here. Well, while I was at the end of college, as I'm observing and trying to be active in Israel stuff, and I'm involved in somewhat this AIPAC rep role, but I'm kind of now confused, but I don't really know. There's a change in administration. Yitzhak Rabin, alav shalom, comes involved. The Clinton administration comes in. And there's a famous peace accords on the White House lawn. Who remembers those peace accords? Yes. Where the shaking of hands with Arafat and Rabin. It's a famous moment, okay? Sadly, it's very far away, but it's a famous moment. Well, I remember watching that moment on TV, and I had tears in my eyes. I couldn't believe what I'm seeing. This, to me, is like, this is the perfect thing. I thought to be pro-Israel means to support this. And what I was shocked when I read the Washington Post a couple days before and a couple days after, I don't know if some of you remember, but there were members of leaderships of AIPAC and other Jewish Israel organizations who were writing public op-eds against the peace accords, against Prime Minister Rabin. In fact, Prime Minister Rabin helped start a new organization at that time called the Israel Policy Forum, called IPF. If you've ever heard of it, you can Google and find it out, whose explicit goal was to build American Jewish leaders who would not go against the Israeli government's attempts to build a peace coalition. And at that time, when I realized, I said, wait a second. Because when I was involved in this AIPAC very early on, one of the things they said to us is that AIPAC says, we support every Israeli government, whatever it stands for, number one. And number two was, we never criticize Israel in public. And what I saw during the Oslo is that they were absolutely criticizing Israel in public when they don't agree. And they were, not supporting the current elected Israeli government. And since then, as other organizations arose, like J Street, which is a pro-Israel, pro-peace organization that I'm proud to be affiliated with, would come forward and say, we support Israel, but we believe she should do different things with the Palestinians, the territories, etc. One of the number one criticisms she receives, or I receive, is, well, you can have your criticism, but don't say them out loud, and don't say them in public, and support whoever's in power. But it appears to me that Miriam Edelson, by the way, one of those people who often said that, she seems to only think you can criticize Israel when she wants to do it, or do it public when she wants to, which basically comes to prove this hypocrisy, which I hope and pray is over, that you can criticize any government, the American government, or any other country, or Israel's government, not in public because you disagree, even if it's in power, because you care about it, because you love it, and your love's shown by this. But this idea that you're going to pick and choose when you're going to do it, in my view, Miriam and these other leaders from Israel who called on me, it's over. You cannot say you only criticize Israel publicly when you like the issue. You have to let it happen whenever the issue comes forward. In fact, the Talmud says there is no love without criticism. If you can't critique someone, then you don't really love them. And so here, when we criticize Israel or concerned about her, whether it's Miriam Edelson on the right or me on the left, it's out of a place of love. So that's number one. All right, number two, which the sermon was called about, is about Elijah's cup. All right, now we get a little Talmudic on you, all right? Everybody knows about Elijah's cup. You come to the Passover table, you have that one in the middle. Actually, we're happy to have a Miriam's cup as well. Let's look at Elijah's cup for a second. What's the basis? Well, on Pesach, there's supposed to be 4 cups of wine or juice drank on Pesach. Why? Because the rabbis say in the Talmud, there's 4 different verses in the book of Exodus that say that we can be free and why we should be free. Well, there's a debate whether there's actually 5 verses. Maybe there's a 5th verse. It's an interesting Hebrew word. Should it be done? The Rabbi Tarfon says, I think there are actually 5 verses. We should have 5 cups on Passover. The rest of the sages, the majority, which is how the Talmud works, say, no, there's only 4 verses. We want 4 cups. Very Jewish fashion, they said, okay, we'll drink 4 cups, but we'll put a 5th cup out that nobody will drink. We'll leave it for Elijah. Elijah will come through the door. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. He'll drink the cup and he'll decide whether that 5th cup really is legitimate. Very Talmudic, fine. But what's the rule there? It should have said, according to the majority, that only 4 cups. And the 5th cup, get rid of it. Why do the 5th cup? Out of respect for the minority, a cup is placed out on the table. This proves in Jewish law, we are against something called majoritarianism. What's majoritarianism? It means just because I have the majority does not mean I can oppress the minority. For example, let's give a North Carolina example, okay? Just because you just have 1 vote above the veto power, Republicans, okay? Does that mean you can now decide that you're going to take every transgender child in North Carolina and oppress them? Or, to get back before, just because there are more whites during Civil Rights South in North Carolina doesn't mean the whites can take their majority numbers and oppress black Americans or people of color. Just because you're in the minority doesn't mean you have no rights. It means you are still protected with inalienable rights as a human being. Therefore, when we have that extra cup of Elijah, it says, yes, you're the majority, but you're not the monarch. You do not get to decide everything. There are basic rights the minority has. The attempt by this government to take its 61, 62, 64 seats and is against 100% what Elijah's cup stands for, is that just because you're in the minority temporarily, because if you keep doing this, then when the minority becomes the majority, guess what's going to happen to you? Smashation the other way. This is not a healthy society or democracy. This is what leads to civil war. So what we want from Israel is, and by the way, which we struggle with in America, is you want the majority, yes. When you are in the majority, you do have the right to lead. However, as a minority, you have the right to rights. And that is what the Elijah's Cup says is what they need to be protected and defended too. All right. Now, here's my last one. Heads up, probably, potentially, the most controversial for some in our congregation. So if point one is that it's hypocrisy, if these people are begging me to give a sermon on this from Israel, then they need to be comfortable for me to talk about Israel, critique her on anything. Leave me alone, okay? Mary Madelson included. Number two, Elijah's Cup teaches us majoritarianism is tyranny as well. The minority needs to be respected by some basic law which protects them too, because the minority can switch. But what's number three? Number three, I'm going to base it in the kind of issue of kashrut, so hang with me here. Some of you know this very well. All right. In Jewish law, there is normal kashrut, and there's the kashrut of Pesach, where we go Meshugana. All right? Normal kashrut, there's a law of 1/60th, the Talmud teaches. What's 1/60th? It means if you have a gallon of milk or something over here, a nice milk thing, and someone has a meat dish over here in the corner, and this milk is, like, say, it's a big vat, maybe you're making a big, some dairy dessert you're making over here, and by accident someone slips and a small cube of, some kosher lamb, okay, flies over and goes into your big vat of, yogurt, okay? There's a law of 1/60th. What does that mean? If that little cube of, stew, lamb stew, goes into your big vat, and you determine it's only 1/60th the side of this entire thing, then you actually do not have to take all this and throw it out. You don't have to go do it. 1/60th in Jewish law is considered so small it doesn't matter. It's considered nullified. It's irrelevant. It's not ideal. No one's taking 1/60th and throwing it in there. But if it happens, it means it didn't exist. But what's the rule on Pesach? Even the smallest crumb of leaven of chametz, if it gets into your wonderful matzo ball soup, okay, you are chopped liver, literally. Okay, chopped liver. Chametz, the standard is it has to be gone, 100% gone. The ego, by the way, representative of kind of a cockiness or arrogance, has to be gone. Okay. So the question is this attempt by Prime Minister Netanyahu and others a 1/60th moment, or is it a chametz moment? For those who believe, well, look, Israeli society is basically healthy, the democracy is basically strong, look at these protests. This represents the fact that the significant number of Israelis are standing up to this. 70-80%, shown in polls, do not want this to happen. This is a 1/60th moment. This is just simply a time where, it will pass, we'll get through it, gam ze yavor, and we can keep moving on. But there are those of us like me who believe this is a chametz moment, where there are illiberal, anti-liberal, anti-democratic tendencies or actions happening in Israel, where this is not just some aberration on the side, but this sadly is part and parcel of the fabric of part of Israel's character. What do I mean? For all the people who have finally come out and said, I'm worried about Israel's democratic character, there have been tens of thousands of Israelis, not just American Jews, Israelis, who've been deeply concerned about Israel's democratic character for 50 to 60 years. Why? Heads up, everyone. There is a group of people controlled by Israel who don't experience democracy. They cannot vote. Guess who they're called? Palestinians. Now you can say to me, which a lot of people in the center will say, it's because it's temporary. 60-year, I can't do the math right now, 60 temporary, it's a long temporary, but it's temporary. We want to give back the territories. We want there to be a Palestinian state. This is not meant to be long-term. Okay, that is, we could debate that answer, but it's an answer. There's another group that would say, might be related, it's because of security concerns.
We would love to give this back, but we're worried legitimately that rockets just like will come over from Gaza. We gave back Gaza. Look what happened. It's temporary and it's security needs. Legit. But it is undemocratic when you control millions of people and you don't give them the right to vote. And if that group of people say, which there is a burgeoning movement, you know what? Israel won't give us, says we're a security threat. Israel's, which again is legit. Israel says that, it's temporary, but it doesn't seem to be temporary. It's going on for multiple generations. You know what? That's it. Let's just become Israeli citizens. Let's just give me the passport to Israel. Let me just let go of a Palestinian dream in the West Bank. Let me just give me a passport. Give me a citizenship number. It's called a special, your mispar, your Tudat Zahut, the number, and let me become Israeli.
But you know what the problem with that is, right? 2 million, 2.5 million, 3 million Palestinians. Israel as a country, including all of its citizens, Jewish and non-Jewish, is 9 million people. If you bring in 2 to 3 million Palestinians, it wouldn't take that many elections for Israel to completely lose its Jewish character. But if they ask for the vote and we don't give it to them, you know what that's called? I don't want to say it because it's being recorded. If you don't give people you control a right to vote, imagine his own country, people we control and don't let them vote, it's the peak of undemocratic. So what's the problem? The problem is Israel's been living with this undemocratic cancer for decades. Can we be shocked when the prime minister says, well, look, a lot of Israelis seem to live, and we're discomfortable, but are able to live with this undemocratic problem over here? Why don't we just move that undemocratic problem into Tel Aviv too? Some actually believe, the commentators that I think are most profound, that Prime Minister Netanyahu actually thought this would not be a big deal. He thought that most people would just say, look, they won, let them have it. What he underestimated, thank God, is that within Israel proper, the majority desires deeply to be democratic. And in all likelihood, I believe, is troubled on some level with what's happening morally with the Palestinian question, and realizes these things are called, to use a modern parlance, intersectional, and you cannot say only part of our country is democratic, part is not, or all of a sudden, all of your country becomes undemocratic. And by the way, this is the same in the United States, that if we allow illiberal tendencies to happen here, then in one place, they will travel to others. So in the end, while some people will say, and I respect it, that this is temporary and security-based, those with those concerns who are morally fraught in their hearts with the fact that this undemocratic action is being taken place, even if they see it as being justified, they recognize those people are, in their hearts, I pray, the majority, and that ultimately any undemocratic behavior in a country affects the entire country. Therefore, what do I see this as? This is not a 1/60th moment. This is a chametz moment. And for that reason, so many American Jews, rabbis, right and left, have said, this is a battle for the soul of Israel, whether she will be democratic, because if we let any of this change, then we potentially let all of it change. And if all of it changes, and we have to choose between being a Jewish state and a democratic state, sadly, I think Israel will lose a significant majority of Jews in the diaspora who will wish to support her if she's undemocratic, which, God forbid, we do not want to have happen. So let me wrap up. This moment calls for us to be clear as American Jews. We can and should voice to our representatives and anyone else who want to, that we love Israel, and through our love, we are concerned about her, and we criticize her publicly, just like Miriam Adelson did. Thank you, Miriam. Okay? Number 2, Elijah's cup teaches majorities, yes, they win. Majorities matter. Minorities are not decimated. That's not how it works. Minorities have rights too. That's what Elijah's cup teaches. And last of all, any undemocratic behavior leads to all kinds of undemocratic behavior. So when we look at this problem here with judiciary, we also need to look over that security wall and say, what are we doing over there? It's all connected to each other. We can't ignore it any longer. I pray with my little teaching here from Beth Meyer Synagogue, North Carolina, somehow it will not only inspire our congregation to struggle with these issues, to see. In a couple months, I'm so grateful our progressive Kehillah is bringing Dr. Jeff Spinner-Halev to here speak at Beth Meyer, who's a local professor at UNC, who's an expert on these issues, spent many years in Israel as well, who will speak about it. We'll see is what we a congregation can do, but number one you can do is when you do talk and think about this, don't say, I can't talk about it. You must talk about it. Like Israelis are talking about it. They're in the streets for a reason, because they want us diaspora Jews to talk about it. They want us to stand up for it. And last but not least, when we go to Israel, we have a nice trip, about 30 from Beth Meyer going. We absolutely are going to go and meet with people protesting on the street. They are representing some of the highest values of what it means to love and care for Israel. And so when we go there, we're going to bring your wishes, and we'll hear more about the complexity. But ultimately, this is a fight for Israel's democracy. This is not one where we can sit it out. I pray with that, we can give Israel the love and lift to maintain her democratic character. Amen, amen, amen. That is my drasha.